We were here a year ago and had a discussion about the title was Leading When Everyone Has AI. And looking back at some of the themes that we discussed, like the introduction of AI agents and AI coaches, potential bottom-up experimentation with AI tools, and the shifts in leadership approaches from more empowerment of workers and less sort of top-down executive control of things. A lot of those themes, I think, have played out actually pretty well over the year, and the discussion has been kind of a guide, I think, to what was coming. So we're aiming to do the same thing and discuss today what we've learned over the last year, and actually talk pretty specifically about some of the use cases and the management and leadership techniques that are working in places. And we have Katy, for example, at Microsoft, has just finished 75 case studies of uses at Microsoft, and Diane is working with, we'll introduce them more properly, but clients at BCG and others, and Parker has an AI coaching tool that's deployed across dozens of Fortune 500 companies. So there's lots of discussions about AI and AGI and those sort of things. That's not this discussion. This discussion is like, how are leaders and managers actually using AI effectively? What do we know from the frontier of this? And how can we actually put it to work in our own enterprises? And among other things, we're going to talk about the value of expertise in white-collar work. And there's some kind of new developments that reverse some of the original thinking about, what having a statistics PhD, is that valuable for someone to pursue anymore? And so we'll talk about that sort of thing. And then there's a question which I haven't heard discussed in a format like this, which is, how do you best manage both AI and humans at the same time? And there are different management approaches that are required for those things, and people are increasingly sort of toggling between the two. And so we'll talk a little bit about what the best practices are there. So we're going to talk but we have about an hour. We promised to get you out at 1:30, so we'll make sure to do that. And we're going to talk for maybe 30, 40 minutes, and then there's so many smart people in the room with perspectives. We want to pull you in to the discussion as well. So first, to properly introduce our panelists, I know many of you know these folks, but Katy George, who's right next to me, is Corporate Vice President of Workforce Transformation at Microsoft, where she leads the company's efforts to understand how AI is reshaping work and jobs. And many of you know she was Chief People Officer of McKinsey. Before that, she has a PhD in business economics. And we're going to talk about the work that her team has been doing on case studies of uses of AI. Next to her is Parker Mitchell. He's the founder and CEO of Valence, and their AI coach, Nadia, is now deployed across dozens of Fortune 500 companies. Some of you might possibly be using it. Before Valence, Parker founded Engineers Without Borders and served as deputy to the co-CEO at Bridgewater Associates, and Shirley has some stories from that time.
But this is being recorded, I think.
This is being recorded, and we have a lot to cover, so that will be later. And then Diane Gherson, who is the Chief Human Resources Officer at IBM from 2013 to 2020, where she was responsible for 360,000 employees and pioneered the use of AI across HR. Diane now serves on the board of Kraft Heinz, is a senior advisor at BCG, and a senior lecturer at Harvard Business School. So as you can see, we have the right people here to have this discussion. Parker, I want to start with you to dive in. Last year, one of your more provocative statements during this discussion was that 2025 would be the year that AI joined the org chart at companies, and that idea was that AI agents would start becoming parts of teams and so forth. What is the state of business, looking back now at the year, or looking at where we're at right now? How has that played out?
Well, I think the arc is critical to pay attention to, because you kicked it off by saying we're going to look at what is today, but I think the story of getting here is also valuable because it gives you an idea of the trajectory of where we might go to. So I'll go back even a year before that. When we first launched our AI coach, Nadia, the conversation was almost always, will someone actually want to talk to AI?
Yeah.
And the skepticism, and we use the term of William Gibson, which is, the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. People using our AI coach talk to it way more than they would sometimes talk to a human, certainly more than they would talk to a manager.
And one of the surprises that you've talked about is people show up in the morning, they're like, hello, Nadia.
And Nadia would try to problem solve, and they're like, no, I just wanted to say hi.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting. But so 2 years ago was, will someone talk to an AI coach? Last year, our provocation was, this will be the year AI will join the org chart. And this year, I think, there's kind of generally consensus that there will be a large number of people who will be managing both humans and AI agents. And there's a world in which 2026 is the year that your AI coach will know you better than your manager knows you. And you might actually want to choose an AI manager over a human manager. And I think that the speed with which this has become normalized for a subset of the population, not for everyone, and the power law distribution of that, I think that trajectory and where that might take us, I think is a really important sort of facet of this to keep in mind.
Yeah, and on that issue, I just saw some Manpower research that showed 50% of people would prefer to talk to AI than their manager about some issue that is complicated, basically. So we're kind of on the cusp of that at the very least. Katy, I want to turn to you and just get quickly to, you've been doing this research, you've been at Microsoft for a little bit, you have this really interesting position where you're trying to figure out the future of work from the vantage of Microsoft, and you've just done all this research. I'd love, can you share, some of the takeaways from that?
Well, maybe just, building on the conversation around manager, lots of different takeaways. But, one of the things we've talked about, I think this will be the year moving from a focus on individual adoption, individual upskilling, individual productivity, to really shifting teams and systems of work. And so a lot of the best examples we're seeing in the way we're trying to codify best practices is really around methodology of how do you actually help managers. Yes, leaders have a role in being clear about what matters, what performance they're trying to drive, how we'll measure success, but managers actually make it happen. And how do you help managers really see the knowledge work that they're managing and reinvent it with AI and with their teams? So, one of my favorite examples of what some of our product development teams are doing is we have something called Camp Air, which is a boot camp that a whole team goes to. It's very different from a traditional learning program where, everybody does their learning at different times and is kind of disconnected from the actual flow of work. This is a team that goes as an intact team, redesigns how they're going to work with AI, and then shifts the way of working forever. And that I think is this whole notion of teams, and then the role of the manager managing that shift for the whole team, many of whom are working with agents, is, I think, going to be one of the big changes this year. I was talking to some of our folks in the sales force, and and they talked about how previously they've been really monitoring usage, how many people are using Copilot and Sales Agent and Sales, all the different kind of sales tools that we have that are now AI enabled, each day. And they said, we no longer do that because we all know revenue per sales rep goes way up with AI usage. So now we just look at people's performance, which I think is an example of the kind of maturation of what we're seeing.
That's really interesting. So I saw Brad Smith from Microsoft earlier, and he was talking about the two sort of categories of AI usage. One is application, which is one is business processes. So you bring it in, and it, and you have an insurance business, and you redo the claims backend using AI. And the second one is kind of individual usage and application and experimentation. What you described is maybe another category, a third category, which is it's not individual, it's not the back end stuff, it's kind of how the team is working together, or maybe it's a mix of.
I think it's bringing those two together. So definitely, when we talk to customers about the way that AI will create value, we talk about increasing everybody's individual productivity and performance and enabling and empowering them to do more than they could have, but also changing business processes, also redesigning the customer interface, and also really bending the curve on innovation. So those are the ways that we talk about it to our customers, but that's also what we're doing to ourselves. And I think what I was describing is even the examples where we're talking about individuals leveraging tools, like the Salesforce, for example, what we're seeing increasingly is how do you ensure that you don't just have kind of a bell-shaped curve of some people using the tools and becoming 300% more effective and some people 1%. How do you actually now, in a sense, create more standards around what are the best practices and move everybody to those, whether that's changing a core business process, and I think that's what a lot of our companies now are working on now is the most important thing they're doing with AI. or whether it's just enabling each individual, but it's moving people kind of as a team, as a whole organization, as a persona, as to the best practice. And then in a lot of our organizations, we have citizen developer teams that are structured so that anybody can come up with new ideas and innovations, but then those are celebrated and scaled to everyone. So again, it's moving from kind of an individual focus to a team or an organizational focus and capability. I hear a lot this week about this year is about narrowing our focus on what really matters to the business and really working at scale instead of lots of little individual experiments.
Great. And I think
I want to bring Diane on, but can I just build on that very quickly? Because this team focus, I think, is critical. And when Oliver Blum, the CEO of Schneider, was also on this panel, and they've deployed Nadia first as a pilot, now to all their 11,000, 12,000 managers. And he said, when we did research, 30% of knowledge work was basically wasted work. And so the commitment, he and I were chatting about this. I was like, my goal at the end of the year is that however you measure it, that 30% goes down to 20%, and then we'll bring it down to 10%. And that requires collective use. And that our DNA was actually around teams. Prasad Sethi, the author of Project Oxygen, Project Aristotle, has been an advisor for a while. So how do you help people collaborate? And how do you talk about an intact team, which is wonderful. And I don't think many people would truly say they have a uniquely intact team. It's a matrix. You can collaborate with so many people. Yeah, sure. And if you can have AI not just coaching you, but sort of across the sort of interstitial spaces between people and between teams, reduce friction, identify inefficiencies, the opportunity there is really powerful. And then one quick thing, we talk about the Bell distribution, the normal curve. Power law is, I think, the thing that we have to be paying attention to. It's like a small number of people are getting an enormous amount of benefit, and there's a long tail. And so averages conceal that. And averages we shouldn't be paying any attention to averages in this early adoption phase. We should find the outliers and understand the outliers, and then expand the outliers. And I think it's really
scale
crucial
their practices,
that we don't pay attention to averages just yet.
And we're going to come back, Parker, what you mentioned about taking the 30% to 20%, I think is made possible by something that's exciting, and we'll talk about a little bit later, but is the sort of new science of white collar work, and the way that Katy, I know, is among the people who have done work on lean manufacturing and things like that. And this is now more possible with white collar work. And just to mention on the team, like the experience of AI usage for a lot of workers is just one. I'm in Claude, or I'm in Copilot, or I'm in ChatGPT or Gemini, and I have my individual thing. And I think one of the things that's coming this year, I would predict, is much more sort of bleeding and coordination between conversations. Diane, I want to pull you in. How does what Katy and Parker have been talking about match up with your board and advising work?
Yeah, I guess when I think about this conversation, we're all in different phases, right?
Yeah.
There's the tool, which, that's the adoption phase of, please use the tool.
Yeah.
And I know companies that are measuring how often and how many tools people, things like that. And then there's the whole process, which is what Katy was referring to, the whole workflow. And that is raising it to a whole different level. And certainly at IBM, what we did was we said, we got to decide what we're not going to do first, right? Yeah. And just eliminate it before we start talking about using AI, and we're going to simplify it before and then we'll use AI. So they're, looking end to end, which usually involved more than one function, right? Yeah. So the whole thing, all the way out to the end product. So
when you said eliminate, I've heard some great examples from IBM where there's like corporate barnacles and processes, and they had special categories in HR for people who were taking leaves to compete in the Olympics, and they realized that actually they could just get rid of some of that stuff.
No, there's plenty of that for sure. But I think also there was just overlap between different functions, because different functions just to have their own databases. Mm-hmm. And now we're all in a data lake, we're all drawing it, we're all using AI. You can take away those overlaps. So that I think is valid use for sort of really rethinking design. And then there's the third phase, which we're almost in, and I've actually seen some companies that are already in it, and that is where the whole process is run by AI, and the humans are the overseers. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of stand back from it all and I go, you know what? I studied this once, and this feels a lot to me like the moment when electricity was invented. We took people out of the guilds and into the factories, and productivity didn't go up. What happened was the individual workers, worked the same way they used to work, and the factory owners who had put in all this investment were like getting a little worried because the dividend was going to the worker. They weren't working as long hours as they did when they were in the craft, the masters' homes, and it wasn't until they didn't have a methodology. So back to the methodology to really get the most out of it. So HR didn't exist then, and sadly, and so there was this industrial engineer called Frederick Winslow Taylor who came along and said, I have a way to do this. It's a time and motion study. And so what he said was, look, we just have to standardize everything. And we're going to take, the person who made the team that made the whole shoe, all the way from cutting the leather to sewing the sole on, the whole thing. And we're going to break it up into micro tasks. And instead of organizing around themselves and having them take breaks when it makes sense for them to take breaks, they're going to be organized around the machines. And we took away their sense of pride. We took away their sense of agency. We took away their sense of autonomy. But boy, we were productive, right? And I'm very worried that if we don't have a methodology, we have the Lego blocks. We know what tasks. I'm on the board of a company called TechWolf, and I know also WorkHelix does this, is break down what are the tasks that are going on in your company, and which are the ones that can be augmented, and which are the ones that can be replaced, and which are the ones that can't. And we know what skills people have. That's something TechWolf does, again, using AI. And we can say which skills are going to be replaced, and which skills can be augmented, and which skills require upskilling, and who's the most likely candidate to be upskilled. So that's great. So we have the Lego pieces. How do we put them back together again? And the thing that bothers me is that we're kind of sleepwalking our way into a Frederick Winslow moment. I really feel that. I'm seeing it. I'm seeing, we're creating new jobs. What are the new jobs again? Prompt engineer? Okay, so I went to journalism school to write beautiful columns, No, I'm a prompt engineer for a machine to write to do the research and write the article, and I'll edit it, right? That's probably not why you went to journalism school, right? Did you go there?
I did not.
You didn't. Okay. You just found your way there.
It's a little too close to home, too,
Okay.
so I think you keep...
So, but true for really all of us, right, is, do we really want to be auditing what a machine is doing? Is that going to give us a sense of pride? Is that going to be meaningful work? And what does that mean in terms of engagement? And what does that mean in terms of developing critical thinking and judgment? And then I look at it from the standpoint of a board member, right? And I'm like, oh my God, where are the future leaders going to come from? Are we thinking about, can we put them in jobs that give them the visceral experiences that will enable them to lead the organization, to see around corners and go, I know that's a pattern I need to go after. This business is going to have to shift. How are we going to build those skills if they're minding the machine?
Can I jump in on this? Because
I
love the analogy. But of course, Frederick Taylor wasn't the end of manufacturing. When Toyota invented the production system, one of the things that they did was to demonstrate how all of the workers had to understand the full their connection to the customer and really understand the end-to-end. And although they were doing standard work, even more standard than in the best, Ford and GM assembly lines, they were very standard. They were also contributing to continually improving the way things worked. And I think there's an analogy there for what we're seeing in AI, which is this notion, again, of citizen developers, not just improving against a an error rate, like we have 30% knowledge work lost. How do we get to 20? How do we get to 19? How do we get to 18? Which is kind of the Toyota way, right? To get to zero defects and zero non-value add, but actually to experiment to create more value. So, we've actually been experimenting with, if you think about the types of waste that Lean identifies in, manufacturing work. Actually, what AI does is it gets rid of all those same, but it also flips the equation on its head by, for example, by augmenting. So I think what's wrong with the work helix, which by the way is the direction I took also, which is let's take all the jobs, illustrate all the little tasks, figure out how to automate 30%, then you've got to reconfigure the way the team works. What we're really seeing is that AI is adding all these new tasks in. So for example, our auditors, they certainly are more productive with AI. But what's far more interesting is that we're doing proactive risk identification in a way that we never could have before. The folks who manage Azure cloud vulnerabilities are now using AI to identify and manage vulnerabilities in a way that humans couldn't do. So that the sales reps who are preparing for a customer meeting, it's not just that we've eliminated tasks that they used to do because we've automated. We're now adding all sorts of new ways of getting insight, ways of thinking about what the next, seller, the new ask is going to be, ways of role modeling and practicing the call. We have an agent that is actually Judson Althoff's voice so that they can ask Judson to get advice about how to think about what they're doing. So you think about what the job used to be of preparing a sales call has now got all sorts of new things. And as I did a lot of work on Industry 4.0, which takes Lean to the whole next level. There's a whole question about, will digital manufacturing replace Lean? It actually builds on it. And when you go to the companies that were most advanced in Industry 4.0, I remember actually Foxconn saying, we are making every single operator into a technician. We're making every technician into an engineer. We're making every engineer into a scientist. And that is more of, we can debate like, where will this all go?
That's the design.
But that's exactly, but that's where I'm seeing AI show up. And I know, we'll talk later about the value of human expertise. We're seeing that the best examples of AI implementation are expert humans who are guiding and driving and quality controlling, who know how to ask the questions about and who know what is value. And I think that will continue. And I think what we now need to do, to your point, is how do we not dumb down human jobs into, the Ford assembly line, but how do we upgrade human jobs into much earlier in your career and much more broad-based, being the designers who design the really interesting value add, like the audit example I gave, or exploration of oil and using AI to find things better than ever before, or solving vulnerabilities, et cetera.
Yeah, no, I think that's the point, right? Is that you need to have a vision that you share with your employees so it's not so scary for them, right?
Yeah.
And if it is like, operate at the top of your license, not doing all the measly things that you used to have to do, then that's okay. That's why I went to nursing school. That whatever, right? I get to be an auditor that really does exciting things as opposed to the boring stuff. And that's great if that's part of our message, right? But often it isn't. It's like we're just looking for productivity. And what I've seen is this end-to-end piece of work that's all done by AI, even with an AI orchestrator.
Yeah.
And they're just looking on, right? So there's unfortunately we've seen too many earnings calls where CEOs announce that they're going to cut their workforce and stop hiring because they have AI. Well, that is not a vision. Okay. Yeah. And that's a horrible message to employees. But to be able to say what you just said, Katy, we are decided that, everyone's going to level up. Cognizant CEO has said the same thing, right? We're going to accelerate their learning. There won't be the normal entry-level jobs, but we're going to give them experiences that accelerate their learning so they'll be a middle engineer within a year instead of taking 4 years to get there. Of course, the next question is, if you're a middle engineer, well, okay, what happens to me? I'm a lot more expensive. These are issues that HR needs to really think about. But right now, we're not. And I think it comes down to, what are our design principles? Is it to give people meaningful work? And if it is, can we test every opportunity and say, no, that's not meaningful work. We're not going to do that, right?
I think part of what I'm hearing here is that you're talking to different clients across different industries, and they don't all have a corporate vice president of workforce transformation.
There you go.
Who is being as thoughtful and sort of about where this all is going. And so there is a lot of like job destruction and automation in ways that make the worker kind of more of a slave to the technology, and it's in the worst case.
I won't claim that Microsoft has figured all of that out, just to be clear, but I do really love this notion of the future of work is not going to be decided by an AI model. It's going to be decided by leaders. And we have choices in that, and it's very clear that we can create tremendous value from AI in a way that also makes the workforce better for humans. That's already clear. And so leaning into that and being explicit about it, I love your charge, really, in terms of to all of us, to CHROs and CEOs about what that looks like.
I work with a lot of small company, AI startups, and I'll introduce them to companies, and HR's never there.
Yeah.
They go and talk with the CTO. They bring
mistake,
in
right?
they bring in their pilots, and they're doing really good work, but HR is not on the scene.
Yeah. Parker, and we have like a bunch of really important topics I want to make sure we speed through a little bit. But Parker, one of the things that we talked about at the beginning, and it sort of relates to what we've just been talking about, is that you have managers who are increasingly interfacing with AI, and then they may actually in some cases be messaging with them in Slack or Teams or whatever, an AI agent. I've talked to companies where a lot of the coding tasks are actually you might have had a worker who would do a pull request or something, and you actually just message an agent that will go off and do it. And then they're also managing humans. You also have humans who have a preference in some cases to interact with an AI rather than their manager. What's the best practice here, and in terms of how are managers kind of containing this all in their heads? What do you think?
There's a lot to unpack there, and I also want to comment just sort of on where this might go. And the framework that has grounded me as I think about sort of systems is the simple, complicated, complex, chaotic. And I'm not sure how many folks here are familiar with this. It's called, I think, the Knebben framework. But we have lived in a world where it is it's a complicated, generally it has been a complicated world. And we built a muscle mass around, okay, if we understand enough, we can control enough, and we can get to an outcome that we want. It's a simplified framework. And many people would say that we are now like on the edge of complexity and chaos. And you can't, the small perturbations are going to lead to unexpected outcomes. So we might have, for example, a great principle, not we at Valence, but like a company, Microsoft might have a great principle, and then 3 other companies in Seattle might do something different, and it might have huge ramifications on the workforce, as an example. So it is so hard to predict what exactly will happen. And I think unlearning this belief, the muscle memory of like how to operate in a complicated system where we have more control and how to reorient to a complex system, I think is a crucial transition for leaders. So that's just high level. I'm humble about not knowing the future. And we've had a chance to interview Jeffrey Hinton, who's an advisor, and he said, I am the closest kind of anyone to the speed of which AI has improved. And he said, it shocks me. I never predicted that it would go this fast. And so I think it's just the humility to say, we have no idea what the new models are going to bring. We have no idea what the workforce, how it's going to do. And we just have to be constantly sensing and trying to make sure that we're paying attention to it. So I just want to...
Yeah, that makes sense. And the other framework, which I love, is adaptive leadership and
Heifetz.
And which seems very relevant. Anyway,
the interesting thing I'd say is like Heifetz is not in the models that much, because Heifetz wrote in a pre-web era. You'll never see Peter Drucker quoted, even though he's still one of the best thinkers on this. So it is kind of interesting that some of the
most useful thinking. I interviewed Ron Heifetz recently, and he's like hasn't really thought about AI. But even as it's very applicable. So this question, and just to make the question really more specific, in some ways with AI, like as we know from working in these tools, you have to be pretty specific and kind of be a micromanager and say, like, I want this, and you're going to do it this way, and you're going to take this persona, and you're going to do that. And then that's like kind of not how it is.
That's not how it, yeah.
Like the opposite of being a good manager of an actual human, where you want to have, emotional intelligence and give people autonomy and things like that. Can you, how do you toggle between the two?
I've sometimes joked that AI should actually be called another intelligence.
Yeah.
Because it is another type of intelligence that we don't quite know how to operate. And if I use a Rain Man reference, how many people would get a Rain Man reference? Okay, got a few heights. So my best friend described it this way. He said, I'm working with AI, and he's like, I don't know if I'm going to get 246 toothpicks or matches, or I can't cross the road, but said that you did cross the road.
Yeah.
Like AI will do magical things sometimes, and it will utterly fail something basic the other time. And so learning how to operate with this intelligence that's not quite like a human, but certainly not a tool, that is a skill set. And helping people, having a sort of AI system, a bot, an agent, whatever you want to call it, that tries to help you operate in that way, recognizing imperfection, recognizing the stochastic nature, you might say something and get a different answer, and learning how to work with that. Like, people are going to be in relation with intelligence because that's the only way we know how to be with intelligence. And people talk about anthropomorphizing, but that is happening with...
I think that's dangerous.
It might be dangerous, but I think that is it happening
Yeah.
anyway? And if it's dangerous, how do you handle with it? I mean, it's good questions to wrestle with.
Yeah, I mean, look, humans have, and David Rock's here, so he's going to help us with this, but humans have the ability to sense in the physical world, right? And there's so much that we can be effective with if we can see someone's presence, see their posture, see how they're breathing, seeing, whatever. Yeah. There's a connection that you build that's even, am I right, David, chemical between people? Okay, so that's what makes us human. And it's really important to run a business, to be able to understand people, right?
Yeah.
Because collaboration, negotiation, all of those things are the hardest things to get done inside of a company, and AI is not gonna make that happen. So to be able to say to your employees, you've got something AI does not have, and we want to make it even better. I know Google's done a very good job at this recently, saying, these are the skills that we want you to grow. They're human skills, and they're really important.
Yeah.
Critical thinking, collaboration, I've forgotten what they were.
Yeah.
But,
and Svenja from Indeed
reinforcing
actually
that.
just told me that they're finding in her analysis that those sort of skills are showing up in job applications and
right.
even more job descriptions, even
Right.
more and more. So we just have, I want to bring people in really quickly.
Yes.
I want to just quickly touch on this point of expertise. And Katy, maybe you could kick it off, because the early sort of research about AI application in workplaces was among the call center research that Eric Brinson and other people were involved in. And what it found was that is that the less experienced workers benefited more from AI tools in a call center. They could handle more calls more effectively. And actually the most experienced workers saw a drop in productivity from using AI, and part of it seemed to be that it was just like a distraction. They kind of knew what the answer was, and they had this thing like talking at them. But so one of the takeaways was like, oh, what happens to expertise? Like, because if you can have the people who don't have the expertise who can be more productive, maybe people who have special PhDs in statistics, or maybe the people who have like incredibly specific tax, code knowledge, maybe that's not valuable anymore because the AI can supply that. So among the things you've looked at in your research, kind of challenges at least part of that, or looks at it in a different way.
Yeah, right? I think we're going to see different, and we're already seeing different paradigms or different models emerging in different types of work for different goals. So certainly we see other examples like the call center one, where people with less experience, less skill can operate at a higher skill. I was actually, someone here actually is one of the big fragrance companies, and they can actually train their young noses, to create perfumes faster, but they can't figure out how to take the, top noses to the next level. So there's certainly examples like that. But we also see, frankly, that some of the less expert folks are the ones who are creating a lot of flop, lots of output and not necessarily higher quality or not necessarily meeting the customer need. And so this notion, I think what we're seeing emerge more often is what I describe as a T-shaped kind of human role, where people still need disciplinary expertise, but they're now able to connect horizontally much more. And teams are becoming more fluid, and we all have to be much more experimental. There's one team I'll give you just as an example that I think is a great example of this. So certainly, our coders are becoming builders, our HR business partners are becoming more integrators, our sales reps are integrating. So you see this notion of increasing kind of the horizontal, which frankly makes jobs more interesting. But the expertise to manage that is still important. And there's some other teams that are going in almost a different direction. So we have a team that does very complex prototyping for our customers. So they come in, they're designers, software engineers, data scientists, and they come in and they help customers develop a really complicated engineering prototype to do something with pro code. This is not, kind of off the shelf, Copilot Studio. And they have leaned into their disciplinary lanes. They have each of the groups have figured out how to use AI to create modular ways of speeding up and improving what their part of the project was. And then what's really interesting is, so they now do prototypes in a week that used to take them 3-4 months, and they're better prototypes. So you can imagine the demand for this group is higher. It's not like, oh, let's fire these people because, now people actually want more of it. But what's really interesting is what they're most excited about, if you talk about to them, they're almost like, zealots about this and how exciting it is to work in this new environment, is that they're creating much more horizontal connection. So one of the reasons that they're going faster is they've made each of their disciplinary areas faster. They are absolutely staying in their lanes, but because they can see across better and they all can kind of participate in a more fluid way across, and because they freed up more time, they're creating more human collaboration to go much faster and to work differently together. And they call themselves Firefly teams, which I don't even know exactly what that means, except it's very nice. And they, this notion of these kind of agile teams coming together in a really collaborative way, leveraging AI, leveraging agents, but still maintaining real human expertise. So it's a paradigm that I think we're going to see multiple different versions, but right now I see the value of human judgment going up, not down.
Yeah. There's another example. I'm thinking about the call center. I'm looking at Zapier, where they thought that what they had low customer service NPS scores,
yeah,
and they needed to improve them, but they needed to scale it. So hiring more customer service reps wasn't going to work. So they did the study, and that what they realized was actually the kinds of questions they were stumbling over were best answered by an engineer. And so they were better off actually cleaning up the engineers' jobs. And AI, back to your point, you have horizontal, access to data. Engineer on call shows up when a certain kind of question gets asked. Well, you think the customer's pretty happy about that. They get to talk to the guy who designed it. So instead of this concept of you have these, very siloed groups and they do what they do, AI actually enables expert on the moment to show up and use their expertise, and you don't have to keep replicating it. The other thing I was going to say, which I think is kind of interesting, is BCG and Harvard Business School did a lot of studies of the issue, finding that the lower performers did better, the average performers did a bit better, but then the higher performers didn't improve at all. And this was across multiple groups. You have to ask people in the audience, what are you going to do about performance management then? Right? You're just you're raising the average, right?
And they're
AI is helping them.
benefiting
They've got a coach, right? So what are you measuring anyway? And so I think that's going to be a really interesting.
That study is super interesting. It's funny. I mean, I'm from McKinsey originally. So one of the things they told me this week, which I had not seen when I was there, they now, when they're doing their case study interviews, they're asking the applicants to use AI during the case study interviews, because what they care about is who's really best able to use AI to get to great answers, not who could do it from first principles without a textbook or whatever, right? So it's interesting because I do think that BCG study is a super interesting one, and it's similar to the call center one. I think that what we're going to see, and I don't have evidence from either BCG or McKinsey, whatever, but I see in other analogies that as people are getting better at AI, the top performers are reinventing and they're creating, and that also moves from kind of an individual productivity thing where, yes, individuals who are high productivity don't get as much value, to, again, kind of how do you make system change? I mean, what we care about is enterprise-wide core processes have to somehow deliver much better. And I think we're going to see, and that's what I'm seeing in some of the case examples where I'm talking about, the team members who have high judgment, high perspective experience play a very important role. By the way, so do the early careers who are bringing the hunger and the, drive for using AI.
If you hire them.
And so it's pairing up and we're talking to lots of companies and, about what does reverse apprenticeship look like and how do you, bring early career along in a different way and all of that. But I think the reinvention will rely on some of the top performers reinventing.
Can I touch on that apprenticeship question? Because Kevin, you remember the very first piece of research that we co-created or co-examined together was around, could an AI coach help with the apprenticeship model? Yeah. And especially this idea of like cognitive apprenticeship and the idea of setting a goal that is slightly outside of the capability, but is achievable. And how do you, it's an emotional management side of things. And when we, I don't know the degree to which it's still exactly applicable, but when we were building the coach, this idea of the leadership pipeline was a core idea, which is you actually have to shift your values. You've been an individual performer, you've been rewarded for these sets of things, and then suddenly you're managing a team, you have to do other things, and you want to, and you try, and then pressure hits, and you miss your targets, and you do what most people at least go back to what they're naturally good at, which is to go in and micromanage. Yeah. And so how do you shift, you're shifting values, you're doing this cognitive apprenticeship, and an AI coach could help you with that. That's what we discovered, and is crucial to do it, especially as the whole processes get reinvented. And I think I'm so wary of those studies because if you took the conclusion of that study, you go, oh, AI doesn't help top performers. I would say that's because they were measured in large companies where the top performers had no flexibility and maybe the best ones left to go to AI native startups, because our marketing department is probably delivering at a 15-person level with 3 hyper AI. Like, it is impossible to tell you how well they integrate AI into everything. So I think we have to look at a range of things and say, hey, how might this play out?
I think that the BCG study was in a controlled experiment, which was, give a specific consulting task to different consultants and then grade them on the quality of their work and then look at, how that changed from before and after AI, which is really interesting. So the top performers, already did good quality work, et cetera, and that's what they found. But to your point, I think if we look at a consulting team and many other work teams, what we're now seeing is kind of a complete reinvention of what that output is to a different level. And that wouldn't have been something that you would capture in that experiment.
Absolutely.
But something that came out after, though, because they did follow-up work, was that they found that people were kind of mesmerized by the output because it looked so good.
Oh, yes.
That they didn't actually apply critical thinking to it.
Yes.
And so the high performers, they did about as well, but they were actually pulling back and not being as critical as they should be of what came out, which would have enabled them to be
that
faster.
Cognitive engagement,
there's that what people call brain rot, right? Where people only used 35% of their brain that they would have normally used in the work they were doing.
So I think, by the way, you're talking about like how do we purposefully design work of the future? I think purposefully designing cognitive engagement, I think is going to be so important. Yes. And so designing not just for productivity, but also engagement and learning is going to be
And that has
critical.
to be a design principle. Correct. And it fails. Like we're not going to do that if we don't pass that test. And it needs to be a litmus test.
I just sort of debunked studies, but there was a study that was quoted yesterday that was fascinating, which is they gave a range AI that was supposed to behave in different ways to a series of people and asked them to perform tasks. The best answer was like mostly Socratic AI coach, basically asking questions. So not giving the answer, asking questions. That is the cognitive engagement that is required for this. And every question, there's more drop off because we are humans and we are lazy and you kind of want the answer. And so there's a real threading of the needle to not just give the answer, which will just be, the work slop because you're just looking like, I guess that looks good, but not just Socratic because people are going to get tired and they're going to take the shortcut.
And you could argue that the best managers are actually the who ask questions of their workers as opposed to telling them. I want to actually pull up folks in the room, and we promised to get you out by 1:30. Do we have a microphone? Or Jay, actually in the front here, if you just say your name and your organization and
Oh, like, see?
yeah.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dr. Joel Myers, founder and executive chair of AccuWeather. I started the company 64 years ago, and we keep reinventing ourselves. As I listen to this and think about our own company, so there are different, it's not one AI. The more rails there are and the less creativity, like in legal work,
Yeah.
AI will be able to do most of it. Customer service, I think, follows pretty closely behind. Once you have it all figured out and everybody's to that level, unfortunately, it may go that it's all automated voices. You're not really talking to a person. Then I think about AccuWeather and weather forecasting and what we've done, where we really used AI starting in the 80s by bringing in all the models and all the data that's available in the world more than anybody else. But the human role is so important because it can get to a certain point of accuracy. But like with tornadoes, like the government provides 8 minutes of advance notice on average. We provide 16 on average of advance notice because of the expertise of our meteorologists in being able to interpret and their experience, years and decades of that work. And that's going to be the case for a long time. And contrast that with medicine, which is way behind where we are in weather forecasting. You now can put all your symptoms in and get an answer based on millions of cases. You go to your doctor's at 100 or 1,000 cases like that, may not do as well as the answer you're going to get. But if you go with all the results from chat, and the doctor had the experience of doing that and using the interaction that you talked about, they'll be able to do much better. But we're years from that.
Yeah.
And so it depends on the field and the experts or lack thereof, and how AI, the foundation is, and what you can add beyond that.
Yeah.
And I think you need to distinguish between different kinds of
Yeah.
jobs and how much creativity and innovation and experience plays, because I think there's going to be a role for humans, at least in our field, for that superiority for some time to come.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for that.
Do you think that we'll end up with everyone with an agent of their own, like back to your concept of that doctor, where you're meteorologists? I mean, you can train your own agent. I have students who've done that, right? And they're like, I've spent 3 years training my agent. I'm taking it to my new job and every job after that because it's embedded all my thinking and all my learning. Do you think that would work in weather forecasting?
Not for a while, because it's not only, we have teams that work collaboratively, and it's the interaction. Because
Okay.
nothing's certain. When you're making a forecast, there's uncertainty. Okay, it's not based on what's happened, but you got to make a forecast. And how you communicated that is the creativity. For example, snowstorm in Eastern Virginia that found people in their cars for days, 24, 36 hours 2 years ago. Everybody predicted snow. Be a little more accurate. That's not with we headlined it, chaos on the highways. We told our business guys, don't go to Eastern Virginia for the next 48 hours, or you'll get stuck. It's going to be a while before that kind of creativity. You want people to make the best decisions, so it's a combination of
Judgment.
science, the judgment, the communications. So complicated tasks like that, and getting that interaction to get the right result when there's uncertainty. Because it's a
Yeah.
forecast.
Great.
It's different.
We're going to pull in a few more people. Do you have the microphone back?
Hi, Kiana Schmiedel, Workhuman. I don't know if I need this microphone.
Yeah, please do, because we're recording it.
Well, there
Thank
we
you.
go. So a couple of different things, but maybe it all centers around this sense of humility. And I'm wondering how we build that up in organizations to then have the resilience to understand what do we do when we say, you know what, all of our people start 3 levels higher than they did before, and that is the new model. But also when you talk about that horizontal work, my concern around examples of call center and what does that mean and how is it working is who talked to the call center people about what they would build if they had the support to build what they are identifying as the challenges, as opposed to what the research and the experts are saying are the challenges. In our first hackathon, cut to the chase, the people that won were our call center workers. And that is something that we as a business would not have picked as the top priority. But when we did that, our CSAT scores went up. And actually, they've now gone out and won awards for AI advancement. And that's a call center team. And so I just get nervous about how we have these conversations about imposing onto people how we believe it should work best for them without bringing them into the conversation. It's similar to the idea of HR not being there in the HR tech conversations.
Number one principle,
Absolutely.
the people who do the work have
Yep.
to redesign the work.
That's right.
So much of knowledge work is tacit anyway. Nobody can actually redesign it for you. You have to be
Yeah.
part of it.
There's no way you
And
can do
so
it.
that's absolutely essential to all of our case studies as well.
And I think, Kevin, you started
Yeah.
with that.
I'm sorry?
You started with that we involve the people in the job to design it.
Yeah, I was going to say that like the whole history of like bringing technology into workplaces is that there's so many examples of failure if you don't involve the workers. And
Yeah, including, in the Taylorized factories when they tried to automate, total failure. Toyota involving employees every single day and improving, total success.
Yeah. Do we have? Yeah, we'll pull in a few more people and then
I'll
Anna
give
in
it a
the
shot.
front.
Yeah, thanks so much. David Rock, Neuro Leadership Institute. So my institute's been making organizations better for humans through science for about 25 years. And so this has been an incredible time to be thinking about organizations and people and brains, and we study brains. But we've found some incredible things, but technology is very unpredictable, you're absolutely right, but humans are actually quite predictable, particularly as they relate to new tech. So no surprise about the sort of gap between AI fluency and sort of middle users. But one of the interesting things is those middle users who are a little ambivalent are actually becoming worse performers, not better. It's not just the critical thinking, it's not just the atrophy, there's all sorts of other effects that we're seeing. But the interesting question that we're studying next is, everyone says, don't offload partner, right? And that's sort of what I hear at this whole event, this whole week, is let's not just offload, let's partner well. So we're actually thinking about the principles of partnering starting from a cognitive perspective.
Yeah.
And just give you one quick example. The experience of having an aha moment, of having an insight moment is critical for human development, for human motivation, for human learning, everything. And so we want AI to accelerate, deepen, and expand those insights, not rob people of them. So that's a partnering principle. And so we're thinking a lot about that. There's a piece in HBR you can follow up on. I'm sorry, it's not in charter, but it's called
Next
What We
time.
Lose When We Work with AI.
Yeah,
It's just came
and that
out. Thank you.
matches your augmentation as well. And
Can I comment really quickly on
Yeah.
sort of some of this idea of like adoption and it sort of ties in a little bit. I'm not sure if this is humans are predictable, but we have one customer and they're hyper data focused. And if I recall, this is the study. So they have Copilot and they have Nadia. And so they have satisfaction scores, NPS scores. And when they looked at the distribution, I don't exactly know where they landed, but let's say they both were at 80 or 8 on 10. The men scored 10% higher on Copilot on average compared to the women, and the women scored 10% higher on Nadia on the satisfaction.
Yeah.
So it was sort of tools that have similar sort of generalized capabilities, but there was a visible gender difference in the satisfaction scores that they had, and it's fascinating to this person who's data oriented. Like, oh, why is this? Let's dig into it more. But just the unpredictability, I would never have predicted
Yeah.
that. And the importance.
why is it? Do you know?
She doesn't know yet.
She doesn't
She's
know
going
yet.
to dig
Okay.
into it. But those kinds of understanding that, unpacking that in the spirit of humility.
Yeah, and being aware of it. Anna?
Right, quickly.
Yeah.
Anna Krijacic, I'm with the Oliver Wyman Forum, which is Oliver Wyman's think tank. And, we just published, as Kevin knows, a study of 300,000 people that we followed over the last 5 years. Two things that you said, right? So I think AI is developing faster than we as humans, both as individuals and organizations, can keep up. And I think that's causing a lot of challenges. And everyone's going to have to show ROI this year, and we'll see how it goes. But fundamentally, where we're seeing a lot of gaps develop is between what leaders think and what employees feel, whether that's on trust or to what extent, they're actually communicating in a emotionally intelligent way, and to
Right.
what extent they're connecting, and whether their employees are following along the vision. What are you doing individually as leaders, or what have you seen other leaders do that's going to help us bridge that gap? Because those gaps in a world where we're all trying to show ROI become fundamental execution gaps, and it's going to be hard to get there.
It's interesting. you just prompted me. Another gap that we're seeing that I think is related is just like we saw with the consumer versus industrial internet, consumer usage and tooling, et cetera, got so much better, so much faster. So just like, all of us are using Copilot or ChatGPT, whatever, in our personal lives and doing all sorts of cool stuff, then you get to work and you can't make it work to make your work as better, And so I think that's also contributing to this notion of gap. I think leaders play an incredibly important role in role modeling. One of the things we talk about is we can't future-proof your job because everybody's job is going to change. All of our jobs are changing, but we'll help you future-proof your career. And really, and to the point from before, really bringing people into the redesign of their own work changes mindsets and gets people excited far more than, doing something to them, which doesn't work anyway. So I think it's a really important.
I think there are some really important principles there, right? Involve, if you're going to participate in the redesign of the work, so that gives you some sense of agency. We're committed to your continuing to grow. So we're going to give you upskilling or whatever it is. Those are two things. The other one that I think is really important that I've seen some companies do well, certainly we did this at IBM, was we said, we can't guarantee your job's going to be here. We have a turnover rate of whatever it is, 8% in this particular job family. There's low demand for this particular set of skills that you have, both inside and outside the company. You will need to upskill. And if you're prepared to upskill, we're not going to replace the people who leave. We're at 10% will leave, but over time, we'll probably need fewer. You will need to upskill. And if you don't upskill, that's on you, right? But we are going to give you every opportunity to upskill. So having some kind of displacement philosophy that you're able to explain up front creates that sort of psychological safety. And look, some people left. They're like, I don't want to upskill, right? I'll just retire. But at least they knew what the stakes were at the beginning. And I think the last thing I would say is it does have so much to do with the leadership role modeling. For the leadership to say, I'm learning too, my job's changing. One of the things that we did was everyone had to learn AI, and we were measured. We top managers were measured on our scores on AI Academy, right? And I would stand up in front of my team and say, I failed chapter 3. I've tried it 3 times. I'm at it again, but boy, I'm really frustrated. But to be able to share that we're all doing this because it's all new for all of us, and we're not just doing it to you.
That's a great thought. We just have a minute left, and I'd love just each of you just briefly to share like a single thought on what folks could focus on, like for the coming year. Parker, maybe you start us off.
I'm going to build off this question of trust because I think that's going to be the defining challenge of the 2026. I think that if there are tipping points in workers, employees, leaders, mid-level leaders lose trust in the commitment of their business, their executive, to this transition, they will begin to retreat. They will begin to use shadow AI instead of the official AI. And I think it is leaders have to pay very close attention to this and keep their pulse on it. And I would say the right CEOs will say, hey, my earnings call, the audience in my earnings call is not the analysts. It's actually my employee base. And the number one thing I need to do is bring them along on this journey. And it will probably be the hardest change management and the hardest leadership challenge they've faced. And Heifetz's principles are probably core to that.
And I've been hearing sort of honesty, transparency more than ever from CEOs about how they're talking their work.
And that might not be in the CEO's DNA.
No. Do you have a quick thought?
As you said, I love, Diane, that you brought this up as well. This notion of we need a new science of knowledge work. Knowledge work, we can't watch it. We don't know how productive we each were in the last hour, how we think about quality. It's one of the reasons it's hard to measure the ROI of AI because we don't know how to measure the quality of the knowledge work or the productivity of it per se. And so this notion of investing in that science, but with principles. I love what you were saying, and we've been talking about that at Microsoft. How do we even codify principles about how we choose to redesign work?
Diane, can you finish this off?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, we all have to make a decision about whether AI is serving humans or whether humans are serving AI. Mm-hmm. And we've got to be really careful about that, and that should be one of the defining principles when we implement AI.
Great. Thank you. This was an incredible discussion. We have Diane Gherson, Parker Mitchell, Katy George. Thank you all for joining us. We hope you will come back next year for the continuation. Thank you. Great. That was great.
Thank you.